On this episode of Talk About Games, we're talking about the top 10 things we think Nintendo has ever done. So, number 10 is probably a little controversial, but...
Well, that's why it's number 10.
Yeah, but that's why it's number 10. It's not the greatest thing, but it's pretty darn good, and that's the Wavebird wireless controller for the GameCube. The Wavebird was what I feel is the first great wireless controller.
And that's a big deal because, you know, we grew up with having the wires, and you know what? I remember being a kid playing Super Nintendo and Nintendo and Genesis, and we all used to say, "Oh, I wish these games, or I wish these controllers didn't have wires. Wouldn't that be cool?"
Right.
And then finally we got it, and surprisingly, it worked well. I do want to say it wasn't the absolute first. I do remember the Atari 2600 had wireless controllers, but the thing about that is the controller had a giant antenna coming out of it.
So it was like a cordless phone.
And I believe the receiver had a giant antenna coming out of it. At that point, you're sitting on your couch in your living room, and you look like an asshole because you have this huge, you know, antenna coming out. You don't want to be sitting there like that. You look stupid. And the antenna is literally like that long. I think it was shown like in a nerd video at one point. So yeah, I agree. The first really good one was, now it wasn't perfect. Yeah. I know that people that play Smash Brothers,
there is delay.
There's like a little bit
perfect.
of lag.
But even today's wireless controllers have delay.
Sure.
But it's interesting because you see like the GameCube, you see the Wavebird as a stepping stone to the 360 and the PS3, and the Wii having like nice wireless controllers.
Yeah. I used to play Super Monkey Ball for the GameCube, and Wavebird was, you know, a GameCube controller. That is a game that's all about precision and accuracy, and you know, there's like a little thin, paper thin line that you have to get that ball to go on, and if you go off at all, you're gonna die on the level. I used to play it with the Wavebird controller, and that controller was good enough that it functioned, and you could you know, have the hand-eye coordination was accurate enough that you could play Monkey Ball and do that kind of stuff with it. It was a damn good controller. Maybe not absolutely perfect, but damn good.
The Wavebird did have two competitors. Logitech came out with a pretty decent wireless controller for the PS2. And they also came out with a pretty decent wireless controller for the original Xbox. The Logitech wireless controllers aren't as good as the Wavebird, though. You can't beat that first-party feel. The only other thing I want to say is that in the NES and Super Nintendo era, man, if you're a younger person, you have no idea how bad wireless controllers were. A lot of them were RF, like,
oh god,
they were like, it was like a remote control, and there was massive amounts of delay, and it was unbelievably bad. The one I always think of is like the red and blue, one with the IR, the like player game handler or whatever.
Nintendo really had their stuff together in the GameCube generation with their controllers, because GameCube had one of the best controllers that there ever was. And the wireless controller was great too. So,
and the NES Satellite is like the bad version of the Wavebird that comes, you know, a few years later.
Yeah. Number 9, Kart add-on chips.
Yeah, so if you looked at the NES and the Super Nintendo, we're really focusing on the NES and Super Nintendo with this. The systems had rather limited CPUs and rather limited memory capacity. So Nintendo looked at that and said, well, we want our system to grow over time. So with the NES, I guess the most important series of chips is the MMC series. There was like MMC 1 through 5, which were expanded memory chips that gave the system further capabilities. For instance, The Legend of Zelda originally came out as a Famicom Disk System game, because it needed the extra capacity. But the Famicom Disk System was never released in the U.S., so because of that, the Zelda, a standard NES cartridge couldn't hold Zelda.
Right.
So it had to use one of those add-on chips. But if you look throughout the NES library, there's different add-on chips that were doing different things, both first and third party. When you get to the Super Nintendo, it gets even more crazy, and the one that everybody really thinks about, or I think there's probably two that everyone really thinks about, but...
Can I take a guess?
Yeah.
Would it be like Final Fantasy 3 because that game was so huge?
That does have an add-on chip, but it's a standard one. It's not.
Okay, so what were you going to say?
It's the Super FX chip and the Super FX2, which was developed by Argonaut Software.
Yeah.
And if you open up your Star Fox cartridges, early ones, it says like Mario Chip 1.
Oh, yeah?
And then as it goes on, there's different revisions of it. But the Super FX chip is actually a more powerful chip than what is inside the Super Nintendo itself.
Holy crap.
So every single one of those cartridges has this chip inside of it.
And that is a big deal. And why I also think that this is important is because at the same time, you had the Sega Genesis, who, you know, they had the CD attachment, and then they had the 32X, and we've talked about that a lot before, about how it had to have all these AC adapters that you plug in, and it was a joke because then you have all these wires coming off of it, and it was a big tangled up mess, where Nintendo had a very clean, almost Apple type of way of going about it, where they added the chip inside the cart to expand.
Look at Doom. The best example is Doom. Doom for 32X has no sound. Looks really crappy. You have the big 32X sitting on top. You have all of that. Super FX chip. Nintendo was able to do Doom on a single cartridge without any add-on systems, AC adapters, any of that. Look at the best example is Super Mario RPG, the later Mega Man X, Mega Man X2 and X3, Super Street Fighter 2, all of these games, Donkey Kong Country, these games all have massive amounts of additional processing power. And that's what really gave Nintendo the edge over the Genesis at the end.
Yeah.
What were these super innovative chips.
Sound was better. And,
I mean, you could see with Super Nintendo the progression from like Mario World to Doom and Final Fantasy and Donkey Kong Country and all that.
Yeah. So I think that was definitely an important part of their legacy that probably not a lot of people remember because it's a very technical.
It's a very technical thing,
but it is important.
But it impacts the games, and that's why it's so important.
All right, so number 8, we're gonna go back and say Nintendo Power.
Nintendo Power, and
I think Nintendo Power was really important because it was this marketing tool from Nintendo, but it came once a month. I'm old enough to remember when it was Nintendo Fun Club, and I had a Nintendo Fun Club. Somehow I got a hold of that, the last issue of it, because I think there was only 8 or 9 issues of it. And then from that, I ordered Nintendo Power. It came in the mail, and it was amazing, and it made me want to buy more Nintendo games because of how it was like a comic book. Every page was really, really colorful. The front covers were always amazing, and I think that it was a magazine that made kids want to buy and play Nintendo games. I mean, the book itself was like a piece of art.
Right.
I mean, it was an awesome book, and they it had tips and tricks, and it was amazing.
And controller covers, like my Super Nintendo controllers still have like the moon and like the Earth on them.
There was comic books inside, like the Zelda comic and things like that. So they added things like that. There was everybody on YouTube does these top 10 videos. We're doing one right now. In Nintendo Power, they had the top 10 NES games and the top 10 Super Nintendo games and all that. And that was one of the coolest things, going through the magazine, being like, oh, what's on the top of the list this month? You
think Mike likes Nintendo Power? I mean,
I was wondering why you kept looking back there. I thought you were maybe looking at Elvira.
No, but you got like the F-Zero poster. Like, it was a standard form factor poster that came in every issue of Nintendo Power. And I thought Nintendo Power was important, not just as a marketing tool, but also because it was like a cultural moment. Nintendo Power was created in a time when there was no internet, but there had to be, video gaming. You see conventions like PAX and forums and things like that. Like, gamers always wanted to come together and share their experiences, and Nintendo Power was like a way to do that before we had internet and things like that.
You know what was great about Nintendo Power and what the really good use of the magazine was? I guess there was a lot of them, but the one I remember is the fact when I used to get Nintendo Power, I used to immediately flip to the back of the book.
Right.
to see what games were coming out because we didn't have the internet yet.
Yeah.
And I would look at the back and be like, oh, they're making a new Mega Man game. I didn't know that. That's how we got our information.
Exactly.
And our tips and all that. It was awesome.
And I think Nintendo Power gave the Nintendo community a voice, and I think, like, even though so many years have gone by, I feel like the voice of Nintendo Power still carries forward a little bit in like the Nintendo.
It was trend setting.
Yeah, exactly. Number 7, save games and save game batteries.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the first game was Zelda.
It was.
And it had a save battery, and that's important because, prior to that, you couldn't, or you had to use passwords. Famous examples of games like, Who Framed Roger Rabbit and stuff like that. You had to enter these huge, long passwords, and it was annoying. It took forever to put the passwords in.
We take for granted the gaming experiences that save game enables. Could you imagine playing Final Fantasy VI without
a save?
Without a save.
Yeah.
Can you imagine playing so many games, so many...
Well, and now games auto-save and everything.
Yeah.
And yeah, exactly. We take it for granted. And, at that time, it was amazing. And it was weird to me that... Because Zelda was one of the first NES games that I had. I had like Mario and Zelda and stuff. And then I bought, other games later. But it was weird to me to go later on and play like Dracula's Curse, which didn't have save. You had to put the passwords in. And I always felt in that era... Oh, well, I played Zelda a few years ago, and that had save, but now these games that are coming out later don't. I always thought that was a little weird, but it was super important to Nintendo's legacy that they initialized that.
Absolutely, and I mean, without save games on consoles, you don't have the crazy rich experiences that you had going forward. Zelda, the game is made by the save game. If you had to reset that every time it came out, like now we know where to go.
Yeah.
But nobody knew where to go. You needed to save,
true. Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to go back and think of that now because if I play Zelda now, I could beat the game in one sitting.
Right.
But back then, I didn't know where to go. I was like, oh, where's level 7? Oh, I gotta get the whistle or something. Shit. Oh, I have to go to school. I gotta do my homework.
Yeah.
Better save the game. Come back to it later. Yeah.
Yeah, and it like as a kid, it totally changed like. The fact that there were save points changed, like, I remember, like, my mom being like, save your game, like, that kind of thing, like, because it's time to go to bed, it's time to go to school, it's time to do all these things, which is really interesting. Number 6, Smash Brothers.
Okay, so Super Smash Brothers, here's why I think Super Smash Brothers is important to me, at least. I love certain genres. You guys know by now, I love the puzzle genre. As far as fighting games, back in the day when I always say back in the day, but back in the day when Street Fighter came out, like Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat, I used to go into the arcade and I would play Mortal Kombat, and I liked it, but I wasn't very good at it. The older kids who would play it were the good ones, and I would play it and I would suck at it. And then same thing with Street Fighter. And then I played Street Fighter when it came to consoles. I played a lot of it on Super Nintendo, and I loved it. But as the years went on, unless you're playing fighting games all the time and keeping up with it, other people will come in who play it all the time and they'll kick your ass.
Yeah, I really don't think that fighting games are a satisfying experience for the novice.
So Smash Brothers was the first fighting game in a long time that was made, the N64 one that I played, and I felt like, oh, I can play fighting games again, and it's fun again because they totally changed, like, the gameplay. They totally turned it on its head and it was brand new. And I love the Smash Brothers games, and I'm not very good at it, but I love that style of fighting. I actually probably prefer it over having to memorize, like in Mortal Kombat when you have to memorize the button combinations. I have a bad memory, so I can never remember, oh shit, I gotta do back circle X and all this. Smash Brothers, you don't have to like remember quite as much. So yeah, that's why I love Smash Brothers. I think it's important.
I think it's amazing that Smash Brothers, all 4 games and Project M are all still viable tournaments. So on the competitive side, Smash Brothers is extremely healthy, and it has a grassroots community. A lot of games like Dota or Overwatch the tournament pressure is coming from the top down. So it's massive tournaments, millions of dollars, everything like that up here. With Smash Brothers, it feels a little bit more like a game like Magic or something like that, where the tournament feeling is coming from the bottom up.
Okay.
Because they really don't have support from the manufacturer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So people are still playing, Smash 64 in tournaments. Like, still today.
That's crazy.
But they're also playing Smash for Wii U. And, people liked Smash Brothers so much, they made a mod called Project M.
Which I played. I love that, yeah.
And Project M has a, living, breathing tournament community. It's unbelievable. There's a lot of pretenders trying to make Smash Brothers like games.
Sure, I've seen
Brawlhalla.
Sure, I've seen a lot of clones, but nothing's really come close to actual Smash Brothers.
It's really unique, and the fact that anybody could pick up and play it, but it also has a great tournament scene, is amazing.
So number 5, I'm going to say couch co-op. I think Nintendo's had a little bit of trouble throughout the years with their online multiplayer, but they've always been the kings of the couch co-op. Games like Mario Kart, Smash Brothers, games like Mario Party, stuff like that. To sit on the couch, and I put it this high on the list because one of the things I think about most when I think of Nintendo is sitting around with friends and playing Mario Kart, doing like battle mode and stuff like that. Playing Smash Brothers, versus with a friend. As much as I love the single player Nintendo games, I older in my life, when I look back at playing Nintendo, I'm going to think about being in a room of friends and all sitting around yelling at each other, playing Mario Party or something like that. Oh, you died or whatever. Yeah.
And Nintendo has changed a lot over the years, but I think that couch co-op has been something that that is baked into both the old Nintendo and new Nintendo. So you have like Pokemon on handheld with the link cables being right next to each other. You have Street Pass on the 3DS. You have the Switch now with the proximity play and the two handles that come off and everything like that. It's every Nintendo. You have the Wii with Wii Sports. Everything Nintendo does when
it's inclusive of other people.
Inclusive of other people having an experience where you're playing with them in the same room, and it's characteristically Nintendo.
It really is, yeah.
You can't get that experience to the same level on PC, on Microsoft platform, on Sony platform. It's not.
It's probably one of the big distinguishing features for Nintendo that Nintendo even to this day has over the other systems.
Yeah, and I think that's why Nintendo tends to be the go-to party system. Sometimes people get together, play Halo, whatever, but it's...
Well, when I think PlayStation, Xbox, or PC, so I think more of people on their PCs or consoles with headsets and that kind of stuff, but not in the same room. Nintendo is your friends in the room having a party.
Number 4 on our list is the Game Boy.
Do we really need to say more?
Do we need to say more than that? When the Game Boy, the original Game Boy came out, the handheld design was challenging. There wasn't off-the-shelf, super fast lithium, super high capacity lithium ion batteries. There wasn't a massive manufacturing infrastructure for cell phone like processors and things like that.
The Game Boy changed the world. When the Game Boy came out, it was the first time you saw video games really in public, other than an arcade. But I used to, you go to the dentist office and somebody's sitting there playing the Game Boy. You didn't see that before that.
Look, I mean, think about what Game Boy did for air travel.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Car travel.
And car travel. How many businessmen were playing Tetris? How many people were playing Super Mario Land? How many people... And if you look at the...
And somebody can make the argument at the same time, well, what about Tiger Electronic? But Tiger Electronic games were not...
It's dumb. It's
very good.
It's pattern guessing.
Game Boy was the first time you really got to play games
Look
on
at
the go.
Look at Link's Awakening. Link's Awakening is a legitimate Zelda title.
Oh my god, it's great.
100%
It's one of my favorites.
Legitimate Zelda title. Look at Super Mario Land 2. Legitimate title.
If you want to go down the list of great Game Boy games,
Yeah.
we could. That's a different list.
Yeah.
that's a different video.
Right.
But the Game Boy was so important, and I do want to say, just thinking of the Game Boy, everybody's talking lately about the NES Classic, and maybe at some point we're gonna get like the N64 Classic. Well, in that same era, how can you go from NES to Super Nintendo, because now they're going to release the Super Nintendo Classic, and now they're totally forgetting about the Game Boy. Are we going to get a Game Boy Classic? Now, I understand that Game Boy is a handheld, but here's my idea for it. Super Game Boy. You release a Super Nintendo with the Super Game Boy in it, and put I would think more than the other ones, put 50 of the best Game Boy games on it.
So they take the shell from the SNES Mini that they're coming out with, they just put it in there.
Yeah, and they do the game. Why not? The Game Boy's great.
They could use the same. I mean, in this day and age, they can use the same damn hardware. Like, I bet you, and I'm sure people have taken them apart, but I bet you the Super Nintendo Mini is the same exact thing
as the NES.
Mini.
Yeah.
Because I read somewhere that like the processor in it is like more powerful than a Wii.
So why would they have to change it? Because they can all play.
They could be playing like.
But anyway, guys, need we say more? The Game Boy, you get it.
Yeah. Now we're getting into like the real. I consider the Game Boy one of the real heavy hitters, but like the rest of this list is like
the real stuff.
The real stuff. Like, it's so important. And number 3 is the D-pad.
First thing I want to say is, yes, Nintendo was not the absolute first to do the D-pad. The Intellivision had the
circle pad,
the circle pad and stuff like that. But the Nintendo took the D-pad and they improved upon it, and they popularized it, and they made the D-pad what we know the D-pad is today.
And I mean, honestly, I think the NES and Super Nintendo D-pads are still like the gold standard for D-pads. I mean, if you look at like the Genesis D-pad is like a goofy like.
Well, if you really want to talk about talk about D-pads, there's a lot of different types of Genesis controllers. You want to talk about Genesis?
No, I know.
Some of them are better than others, and it might go down to preference and what you prefer. And that's actually what's kind of cool about the Genesis, that they release so many types that whatever you prefer. Some people might prefer the more sort of slick, plasticky ones. Then they released ones that had more of a grip on them. I've had a problem lately. I was playing
Xbox One.
I was playing Shovel Knight, and the Xbox 360, the one that comes with the system, I don't think that D-pad is very good.
It's awful.
So they released all kinds of other ones. There is one made by Hori. There's probably a few. That's probably the one that I prefer actually the most out of those. But also there's a more expensive one called the Xbox Elite controller, and I bought that as well, and I didn't think it was as good as the cheaper alternative. The Hori one was that was the one I liked. But anyway, this is about Nintendo creating the D-pad, and you're right in saying the NES one was like perfect. The Super Nintendo one was perfect. And now you find in companies that later on that are coming out with D-pads, you would think that they would get better.
Right.
A lot of times they're getting worse.
Yeah, I mean, even Nintendo's own products, like some of the D-pads,
some of them aren't quite as good as they used to be.
But so the reason that I thought the D-pad was so important was because look at games, look at Mega Man, look at Castlevania, look at Mario Brothers, and many, many other games. Those games would not be as fun as they are without the D-pad. If you're playing that with an Atari joystick or some joystick type thing or something, it wouldn't have the feel as this like super sharp digital D-pad.
I'm gonna say something. So I'm one of the biggest Atari fans like ever. I love the Atari.
Yeah.
But I grew up as a little kid playing Atari, and you'd have that Atari controller with the stick, and you play enough Atari for a while, and I used to sit. I know people always say, "Oh, you pop an Atari game for 2 seconds, and then you pop it out, and you're done with playing Atari games." I love the Atari, and I would sit and play a game like Demon Attack for like 2 hours and just sit there and go. I loved it, but that controller will fucking hurt your hand. Like really, because it's tough to move around. It's like sticky. So what you can do is you can actually use like a Sega Genesis controller and plug that in, and a lot of times I end up doing stuff like that. There's a lot of Atari alternatives, but again, I'm going back to using a D-pad as opposed to a joystick, and it was because of Nintendo that the D-pad became so prevalent, and that the Genesis started using it and all this stuff.
You know what's funny about the D-pad? I think it's funny. Right here on my finger, on my like actual finger, this spot right here has been like this
since you were a kid?
Since I was a kid.
Yeah.
Because of the Nintendo D-pad.
Yeah. You have like a callus on your thumb?
I have like a callus like right
permanently.
here. Like permanently.
I probably have that too, actually.
From that, it's like a specific spot, but that's from the Nintendo D-pad.
That's hilarious.
Right? I think that's kind of funny.
So number 2, marketing Nintendo as a toy and resurrecting the entire industry.
Yeah, if you're not from the United States, video games were dead in the U.S. Video games were completely dead.
There was
there was a million Atari clones and Pong consoles and Atari competitors, and the Christmases leading up to the NES, those games weren't selling anymore.
And the Atari company itself was making some big mistakes. So we're not going to make this a video about the video game crash of 1983, but that's what happened. It's been well documented, and Nintendo brought the industry back, and what they did, they completely changed the world. What video games are today came off of what Nintendo did back then in 1985.
The decisions that small group of people made in a warehouse outside of Seattle just literally created the gaming industry. The reason you're watching this video right now is because they did the right things. They made the right decisions. They were in New York at the right place at the right time. They talked to the right toy people. It was a small group of people at Nintendo of America that built the modern gaming industry in America and resurrected it worldwide.
Yeah. I don't think we need to really say more. But leading into that, what they did, and this is number 1, they made characters and games like Mario, Zelda, and Metroid. Prior to Nintendo doing that, was you had you had like a lot of space shooters. You would go into the arcades and you play games like Space Invaders, and I love those kind of games to this day. But there was no real story there, and there was no real world. And Nintendo created a world. The first time I played Legend of Zelda and Mario, I felt like I was in those worlds. I wanted to be part of those worlds. I would go around town as a kid singing the Zelda theme song and imagining myself in Hyrule and things like that. I didn't do that when I was playing River Raid on Atari 2600.
I feel like Mario, Zelda, and Metroid draw a line from when they came out to games that are coming out now, to Destiny and Skyrim and even shooters like Call of Duty. All of these things all originate from when Nintendo, with the original Nintendo Entertainment System, makes these huge immersive experiences that really flip the script for what a video game is. If you look at the games that came before and the games that came after Mario, Zelda, and Metroid, it's a totally different landscape. And I think that was the biggest gift that Nintendo gave us, was games can be big, games can have stories, games can have screens that go on forever.
And it's not to say, that some games prior to that didn't have stories and things. There definitely did, but the way that Nintendo did it, and the fact that so many kids got the Nintendo for Christmas and things like that at the time, they popularized it to the point where, like we had said in another video, kids would say, I'm going to go play Nintendo, and that meant video games. It's because of the fact that when you played the games, you felt like you were immersed in this world, immersed in a story. It was more than just a little ship firing at another ship. There was a reason that ship was firing at the other ship. There was a reason that Mario is why is Mario getting to the flagpole? Because there's this whole story about Bowser and all this stuff. They brought purpose to it, and yeah.
I think that a lot of the success of Mario, Zelda, and Metroid came from the fact that Nintendo changed the way that game development teams were staffed in a way when they took a chance on Shigeru Miyamoto. The fact that you got somebody, he's an artist, he's quirky, he's playing around in caves and drawing pictures, and he's going to be a key part of a game development team. Now we wouldn't even think twice about having an artist, having a storyteller, having those kinds of people.
Back in the Atari era, they had artists, but a lot of times what would happen back then, it kind of reminds me of what they would do with a lot of old movies. I used to go into to go rent a movie, and you'd go through and you'd find these big box VHS tapes, and it would have amazing art. And then you go and you'd rent the movie, and the movie wouldn't be very good. You rented it because the art was good. Same thing with a lot of the Atari games is you'd have a front cover of like Breakout or something, and you look at the artwork and you see like this guy in outer space with this amazing like painting, and then you go play the game and it's like bloop bleep bloop.
Yeah.
Nintendo was the first one to really give you what you thought. In fact, a lot of the covers of Nintendo games, it was almost the reverse. You'd get the cover of the Nintendo game. What's the cover of Zelda? It's just like a logo that says Zelda, and it's got, it's very simple. But then you play the game, and it's like, holy shit, this is an amazing experience.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I definitely saw that. Like, look at the side art in arcades. They should have, all the people who did the side art for arcade machines should have been working on the actual games.
Exactly.
And that's something that Nintendo changed.
Yeah, you look at the side art for Centipede, and it's like this amazing, then you play the game, and it's just like all these little things. But yeah, exactly. Had they had the artists working on the actual games, and that's what Miyamoto did. He brought an artistry to the game itself, which is a legacy that has continued on to this day. That's how people know games today. Every game that you play now, you owe that all really to Miyamoto and early Nintendo. And again, not to say that there aren't examples prior to that, but Nintendo's the one that really popularized it.
I mean, they did it one time after another. Boom, 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 boom. All these games came out. I'm shocked at the difference from the early black box style games, and I know Mario was early and Zelda was early as well, to like where they were a few short years later. It's like, oh my gosh, yeah, unbelievable.
Yeah, and people often ask, are video games art? Give me a break.
Yeah, it's not even a question.